This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by corporate board member and host NYSE Euronext, along with governance knowledge partner, the Center for Audit Quality, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.
Welcome to this edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I'm TK Kerstetter with Corporate Board Member, and we have a very interesting show today. In fact, for those of you that worry about your shareholders and investors, we actually have one of the largest that exists today with us, and it's my pleasure to introduce Ann Sheehan, who's the Director of Corporate Governance for the California State Teachers Retirement System, or as you are known as CalSTRS.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Well, Ann, I think the good place to start, and particularly when there is sometimes confusion between CalSTRS and CalPERS, so why don't we just take a moment, describe CalSTRS and then its relationship to CalPERS.
Sure. Thanks, and thanks for having me on. Well, CalSTRS is the California State Teachers Retirement System. We serve the retirement needs of California's K-12 and community college teachers. We have about $151 billion assets under management. We are invested all across the markets: public equity, fixed income, private equity, real estate. We're getting into hedge funds, infrastructure. We're in everything. We are inherently long-term investors, as we like to say in CalSTRS. As long as they're teachers in the state of California, we're going to be invested across and in the markets. Now, our neighbors across the river, because if you come to Sacramento, CalSTRS is on one side of the river and CalPERS is on the other. Our neighbors across the river, California is the Public Employees Retirement System, and they have assets under management about $230 billion. They cover the retirement needs of California government workers and some local and county government. So between the two of us, we have over $400 billion, just about $400 billion now in the market. So they're like our sister or brother fund, however you want to call it. We share some board members, and we work together frequently on issues. But CalSTRS, as I say, is focused on the teachers' needs, 835,000 teachers that we look out for.
Well, $400 billion is large. And let's just take your portion, the $150 billion. When you're that big and you operate sort of with the indexes like you do, invariably you end up owning every company that's indexed, correct?
Correct. We own the market, and
Yeah.
we're going to own the market for a long time. We're inherently long-term investors. We can't do what they call the Wall Street walk. When I go in and use my corporate governance rights and responsibilities and go in and talk to companies about concerns we have, I'm not going to leave that company. When they say, if you don't like us, sell us, I can't sell you. We're going to be in the company and be a holder of that company for a long time. So we have to develop a relationship and really develop an engagement and a dialogue with that company so that we can communicate to them concerns we may have, and we can hear from them their perspective. So we are long-term investors, and we use our corporate governance rights really to help manage risk in the portfolio. We identify issues that we think could cause problems and could decrease the value of those companies. So we write to them, we engage with them. Sometimes we file shareholder resolutions, but we keep a constant dialogue with these companies that we hold and keep that communication up.
You could never have enough people to cover all those companies. So you had mentioned you write letters and whatever. Is there anything you do?
We do, because you're right. I cannot communicate with 7,000 companies, which is how many are in our portfolio, and voting those proxies every year. So what we do is we pick key issues that we really want to communicate what are important to us. An example is executive compensation. After Say on Pay came as a result of Dodd-Frank, we had to vote Say on Pay at all of those companies. So what we did at CalSTRS is we developed guidelines as to what we're looking for that's the best pay structure for the company, what we like to see in terms of short-term performance, long-term performance, how they align pay for performance. We posted those guidelines on our website, and then after the first year of Say on Pay, we also issued on our website and sent to our 500 largest holdings a lessons learned document. What did we learn from the first year of Say on Pay? What were the lessons that we learned? What did we like? What did we dislike? How did we vote? We voted against about 23% of the Say on Pay resolutions that year. We posted that, and then we sent it to people and said, we'd like to talk to you about your pay structure and the concerns that we have. Diversity in the boardroom, which as you know is a big issue for us. We and our colleagues at CalPERS have started the Diverse Director Data Source. We are seeking greater diversity on boards because we think it really is a shareholder value issue, that a more diverse board, the company with a more diverse board actually performs better. And we've got some statistics to go through that in terms of return on equity, return on shareholder value. But as we talk about diversity in the boardroom and ask them to be more diverse in their selection of board members, we wanted to give them a tool as to where they could find some of these people. So we created the Diverse Director Data Source. We see that as a market solution to diversity in the boardroom. As you know, about 16 countries around the world have really taken a serious approach to diversity and mandated quotas. We don't think that's the right way to go in our country. We think it's a market solution. The boards have got to focus on greater diversity, greater women, as well as ethnic diversity, but not just the traditional sense of diversity, but also skill sets, background, experience. We think that makes for a more robust discussion in the boardroom. So we really wanted to address this from a market-based approach. Majority vote has been a big issue for us. We filed over 100 resolutions this past year asking companies to change their voting standards for their board members to majority vote. So as we carry out our corporate governance activities, we publicize them, we post them on our website, we get out and talk to people and to talk to groups about our efforts. So that while I can't touch all those 7,000 companies, our hope is through our other communications mechanisms and partnership with our friends and colleagues in the shareholder community, we can get the message out as to what our priorities are.
When I think of CalSTRS and CalPERS, and particularly if I look back 5 years ago, I would say that CalPERS would have been the more aggressively active one. Not that either of your organizations actually look to put representatives on, even if you can do that. But if I was asked that question today, I would say that CalSTRS has become more active in the sense of making sure that companies know what your views are. Would you say that's a conscious
That is a
decision?
conscious decision. Our board made a conscious decision that governance was an important priority for them, and they really placed an emphasis on this. We work closely with our colleagues at CalPERS, and as I say, we partner with them a lot. But I think having more voices in the shareholder community and having more active voices who are long-term shareholders like we are, we think is a positive thing. We want to be active. We want to be communicating to the companies and make our voices known on corporate governance. What we saw with the financial crisis, we saw that governance really makes a difference. And so we are happy to lend our voice and to take the lead and to become more active in these areas.
Well, I'm happy to tell you that today you have an audience of not 7,000, but you have a good chunk of companies represented by the directors watching this show. So what would you like to use? What would you like to communicate, knowing you have that platform
all
right
of that
now
audience
to do
out
that?
there.
What message would you tell them?
I guess there are a few things that I would say to the board members. You know, stay vigilant on our behalf. You are our representatives in the boardroom. You know, I elect you hopefully by a majority vote every year to represent our interest. And you're there to represent all shareholders, not just those colleagues who are sitting around that board table. So I want you to stay vigilant on our behalf. I want you to be a bit skeptical. You know, you're there to oversee management and work with them, but you've also got to push them and challenge them and prod them on our behalf so that we make sure risks are being addressed, we make sure strategy is being set properly. Among the most important things we see for board members, CEO succession planning. Pay attention to that. As we've seen with recent changes in the boardroom and with recent changes with CEOs, some of whom have left sort of ungracefully, others have a smooth transition. Make sure you know what's going on with the CEO succession plannings. Executive compensation, pay attention to that issue. It's gotten a lot more attention lately, and the say on pay issue has really forced us to have a discussion and dialogue. Do what shareholders ask when a resolution passes. If a shareholder resolution passes asking to implement majority vote or some other change, do what the shareholders ask. If 70% of your shareholders say it's time for a board member to go and don't support them, we think it's time for them to go. We need you to listen to shareholders and engage with us and really become partners with us in managing that company.
Well, I didn't know that you would be so prepared for that, but that was a good litany of suggestions, and certainly, hopefully, at least our viewing audience will benefit from you going through that. So It's typical for me to ask this next question of all the experts that I have come in as guests, and that is, and this is something that you should be very familiar with, and that's the trends in the boardroom currently. So I want to ask you, when you look at the boardroom trends that exist, what encourages you about the boardroom going forward, and what sort of concerns you?
Well, on the good side, I would say that we're seeing a lot more openness on behalf of board members, a lot more disclosure about issues affecting us as shareholders, transparency. We're seeing more about the transparency, the disclosure of board member qualifications, who's sitting in the boardroom, the actions they're taking. Say on Pay has really engendered a better open communication and dialogue with board members and shareholders, and we see that bleeding over to other parts of the boardroom. We are seeing some movement on diversity in the boardroom. As you know, we took on our friends in Facebook on this issue of greater diversity, and they did add someone to the boardroom. But we think more can be done in terms of diversity in the boardroom, which, as I said previously, we think is an important shareholder value. I think board members are making themselves more available to shareholders. I think it's important for shareholders to talk to board members on occasion, for the board members to hear it directly from the shareholders. And we're seeing a greater trend on behalf of board members of making themselves available. On the bad side, it would be the flip of some of those. There's still some companies that do not let their board members talk to shareholders, which we do not think is a good practice. We understand how busy board members are, but sometimes when there are important issues that they really need to hear directly from the shareholders, we think companies should make the board members available. On the diversity of the boards and sort of refreshing boards, it's still a fairly small insular pool of directors out there, and we think that needs to change. That's why we're doing the diverse director database, to make those candidates available to these boards as they look. But we think more needs to be done. Acknowledgement of that issue is sort of the first step, and then the next step is really taking some action to get some of those members in there. The third would be the rise in dual-class shares, especially among some of the technology companies out in California. That causes us a real concern. And it is a board member issue because they are the ones sitting in there deciding what the structure of the company ought to be. And while companies are doing well who have dual class, and when the stock is going up, everybody celebrates it. But when the stock starts going down and people look around and say, what can we do about this? They realize they don't have equal voting rights and cannot get the change that they may need in the boardroom. So that's a concern for us. And so we'll be staying on that issue for quite a while and really trying to educate folks about the long-term damage that dual class shares can do.
Well, Ann Sheehan, no surprise, you were very succinct with your points, and I'm sure that our audience has benefited knowing that you are a significant shareholder in all of them. And that will conclude this week's edition of This Week in the Boardroom. I want to thank Ann for joining us and look forward to being with everybody next week when we'll take another look at a critical topic that helps you as a board member or as a committee member to be a more effective director. Thanks, and we'll see you then.
Join us again next week for This Week in the Boardroom, brought to you by Corporate Board Member and host NYSE Euronext, along with Governance Knowledge Partner, the Center for Audit Quality, and contributing partners, National Investor Relations Institute, and the Society of Corporate Secretaries and Governance Professionals.